Hi, my name is Ken Martin. I'm the CEO and co-founder at GreenPark Sports.
So, Ken, for people who are unfamiliar with this, talk about what GreenPark Sports is exactly.
Sure. So, our vision really is to kind of reinvent the way that fans, specifically sports and esports fans, can engage and be more of a part of the thing that they love. Traditionally, as sports fans kind of role as a supporter, is someone that kind of lives vicariously through their favorite athlete or team. And we envision a world where they're very much more of a co-op. It's a cooperative play. And you see that in forms of fantasy sports and other things where gamification of it has happened, but it's not on a broader kind of casual level, right? It's not on that kind of, again, obviously there's many, well, not so much anymore, many definitions of the metaverse, but there's a lot of different points of view on it. But when you imagine more of a virtual world where it is almost kind of analogous to a sports bar or a pub or a lounge, the oasis for sports in a sense, you now create a welcoming, unifying, connecting environment where sports fans can go and test their knowledge, find like-minded fans, and basically celebrate in a way that is not your typical, I'm going to go online and yell at the internet kind of way, right? This is a much more immersive kind of experience.
I think it's interesting because one of the things that I feel witness the growth of esports happen is that the thing that sports has, traditional sports over esports, is they don't have that city camaraderie. We all have that city team, right? We can all rally behind. With so many different leagues and games, it's really harder to do that. Would your system kind of help that transition to improve that?
Yeah. Sorry. The interesting part of it, the lack of regionality, right, to esports is unique to it. But what's interesting is once we got digging into because we're specifically Gen Z is the super hot spot, millennials is a hot spot too, and part of that is because a lot of these leagues, if they don't hook fans early enough, it's really, the NFL told us, they're you really, unless they're a fan of the NFL by the age 18, it's almost impossible to get you to one afterwards. Esports, it's a little bit different, but my point is that even in traditional sports, even in analog sports, the regionality is not as big of a factor anymore. So you think of it this way, right? Fandom has classically been inheritance based. Because I grew up in Boston, because my family were Celtics fans, etc. I almost have to be. It's like a religion. But now it's not so much given family as far as fandom goes, but it's chosen family. And so you could be, an expat somewhere, or you could be in the middle of, Colorado and be a Lakers fan, but then you also have a favorite athlete that plays for the Miami Heat. And so it's an interesting sort of multifaceted fandom now that allows it to be fan-centric and not have to silo between we're an esports product or we're a stick and ball, sport product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It totally does. Speaking of that, traditional sports have always had the problems with national, international audiences. For example, U.S. football, huge in the U.S., in the EU, not so much. Right. Esports doesn't have that problem. There are more of a global brand or a global sport. What can you do in terms of on the esports side internationally with GreenPark?
Yeah, so what's great is that runway has already been laid, right? So as we work with North American League of Legends, and as we really cut our teeth here, almost North America as a test market, it then becomes a lot more predictable in how we roll that out. It's already kind of a global culture. There's differences, of course, but it already is kind of primed for that. I would say that the more work is to be done on things as you described with an NFL as an example, where it is US centric. And then at the same time, when you look at European soccer as kind of the global sport, it is now getting its roots now here, even more so now with the MLSs and the La Ligas and others kind of growing. So what's interesting about the traditional sports is you mentioned sort of the time delay aspect of it. Well, part of our solution is we are not at a second screen app where we're we're building this thing, and when the game is on, you're playing, and there is a moment in time for you to engage. But the whole thesis is on the fact that there's way more time during the week when that game is not on than when the game is on. So you think about the asynchronous aspects of being a fan, in Europe or Japan of an NFL team, as an example, or NBA team, or any of the leagues. And it provides a lot more of a leveling of the playing field, if that makes sense.
Where do you see, like, I mean, obviously social media is a huge influence when it comes to anything sports or even community driven. Where do you see social media like integrating into your program, as well as hardware aspects like VR, for example?
Yeah. So on the social media front, it's interesting when you look at the data. The shoulder content has become the primary content. Like more time. So when you look at the pandemic, right, sports viewership has gone down. And again, maybe it's more biased towards traditional sports, but engagement went up. And a lot of that is all in social media. I would say that the psychographics of what we're after, they're very much more interested in the stories, right? More of the intimacy of like the athletes, the players, what's their backstory. And it's all the classically things that you would even look at reality TV and be like, oh, well, now I care about certain things. So social media gives you that intimacy and kind of, conduit. So when it comes to GreenPark, as an example, being a fan-centric experience, our strategy and content strategy moving forward is very much of a in the crowd, conversing, and basically bringing our kind of levity. And there's a comedic streak to what we're doing that I think is quite unique to any other sports brand. Most sports brands are very authoritative, right? We're the authority on this. We're a lot more kind of, I would say, more of the subversion of that, where we're not trying to be crass, we're trying to be inclusive, but we're a little bit more, I think, as a brand, closer to kind of like a Last Week Tonight or Daily Show kind of levity brought to what's happening, as opposed to kind of the starkness of it. So that community piece of what we're doing is an essential part to kind of the context. When something happens, the ability to react. I mentioned that, right now, the number one basically activity online is yelling at the internet. Like, yes, there are some playing sports betting and fantasy, and some are playing the simulation games of various things, but the majority are online basically just tweeting and commenting and yelling. So we think we can make it a lot more entertaining in doing that. Your other question about platform, we are mobile right now, but we are very much a multi-platform sort of co-play, basically, experience in the making. So right now, of course, mobile is very ubiquitous, but being able to have different modalities, someone from VR, someone that is in AR connecting into someone who's experiencing it through mobile on a train. That's the larger plan, is really that kind of pure, kind of embodied internet kind of idea, where the singularity of those two spaces, it just depends on what you're doing in context.
So this last year we were in a lockdown, and a lot of traditional sports completely stopped, and a lot of esports that were traditionally watched and played in person had to go online, and some of them completely unplayable. Smash Brothers unplayable, right. A lot of the fighting games completely unplayable. Well, what did your team learn from that during that period in time where everything was kind of shut down and people were going 100% digital for sports, and were in certain cases even digital esports weren't translating well to the pandemic shutdown?
Yeah. Well, one, we were very happy that we didn't pick a side, because at that time we're like, oh crap, we don't know when the NBA is coming back, we don't know when these others are, but it's awesome that League of Legends, there was I don't know if you remember, there was like at least maybe a week or so when they were trying to figure out, well, how do we do our remote tournaments? And even in chatting with them, they were trying to figure out how to make the logistics work. But then it was sort of business as usual. Now, when it comes to esports, from our perspective, we love the guys at Riot. We love Riot in general. We love League of Legends and so forth. But League of Legends and some of the other ones that you're familiar with are disproportionately larger than most, right? There's a large esports, and then there's wannabe, and then there's a long tail kind of thing. And part of the challenge in what we're doing, of course, is we really want to create a very unique and authentic experience, and that equals development costs. So the fear of hopping into something that might be hot right now as an esport, a game that just popped in. I mean, we saw some of those games that kind of had their day and then they kind of flattened. Those are the ones that we scare, like basketball, football, soccer. These, like, basketball's not going to go away, right? As an example. But when an esport is the sport and they own that sport as the game, there's just more consideration. So right now our goal is really focused in on League of Legends and making our case with them. There's a great overlap between League of Legends fandom and NBA fandom, just inherently and natively. So it's just a great proving ground for us. And then others that are, I mean, even when you look at, even Dota, like there's a number of COD and CSGO and others that have stood the test of time. That would be great. But we feel like we need to crack the code on League of Legends first.
This may be a marketing question or a consumer question, but what are some of the challenges in getting people off platforms to use yours? I mean, when someone's on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, they generally don't want to leave that platform for any reason, to watch a video, to chat, to read an article. They want to stay and get all that information in one place. How do you solve a problem like that with your GreenPark app?
Yeah, well, I mean, a big part of our success is not making the app have to do all the work, I guess is the easiest way of saying it. When you look at kind of a metaverse view of things, it means having, sovereign territory in many different places, right? Whether it's the sandboxes in the blockchain side or the Instagrams or the TikToks as where we challenge fans. So when they spend time in GreenPark, it doesn't necessarily need to equal GreenPark the app. GreenPark the app is kind of where certain kind of high fidelity experiences go, but the kind of ecosystem of what we're building will give purpose to a lot of the destinations that these fans are already in.
You talk about the GreenPark metaverse as a whole. Like, is everything going to be free? Is it going to be ads? Is there like a premium service people pay for to have special access to, like in cases for Twitch, for like emotes or maybe certain chat options or social options?
Yeah. So right now, as of today, we are what you would consider a typical free-to-play kind of economy, right? We have a paid currency and a free currency, and the free currency is what you grind, and you don't have to spend any money, but you spend the time doing it. And then there's the gems where you can pay because you want it or you're impatient or what have you. When you overlap the NFT side of what we're doing, that's when you get the play to earn side of that equation. And so, for us, it is that extended value of an already existing virtual economy. Like even with our Series A investor, Galaxy, the sort of blockchain through line has always been part of the plan. But our plan you need to find the fun first. You need to find the utility first. And then it's essentially extending the value of owning that asset. It's like no longer is it like if you went to a mall and you bought a shirt there and you could only wear the shirt when you're at the mall. You have to take it off before, it's like that's kind of how games are right now. So that's kind of where it's very much sort of hand in glove to the idea of a virtual economy that then can have secondary markets and be able to bring in other NFTs as a way of being kind of a single source of truth for fandom, right? Like there is no place I could go and look up how big of a fan Greg is of a particular game or sport and almost see it kind of stat based, in the way that I could go to LinkedIn and see someone's vocational scorecard of sorts. Fandom is not quantified right now, but everything else in their world is, like clicks, likes, comments, profile views, everything, but fandom isn't, which is the exciting part for us.
Would it be hard to implement in your program and your metaverse company in general, the amount, because like we talked before, traditional sports, just like, 4 or 5 core ones, right? Hockey, baseball, basketball, baseball, football, soccer, and that's it, right? Then you have the different leagues, but the sport's the same. And in esports, it's first person shooter. Okay, what first person shooter? Is it Overwatch? Is it Call of Duty? Is it Counter-Strike? MOBA. What MOBA is it? Is it one of these several MOBAs? Why fighting games? I feel like the blanket across games has got to be challenging for your company because there's so many genres and so many types and so many competitive games, whether they're, like you said, big or little, and they're all there and they all have their fan base.
Yeah, on the esport front, specifically, I guess this is one way of looking at it, right? There's certain qualifiers, and obviously League of Legends meets all of those for us right now. But as we look at that second and third esport and adding that, yes, there's sort of market penetration and general kind of, it's fortified, like it's not going away. It's like clearly like there's a community there, and I think the community piece of it is essential. But to be honest, it's a publisher and a developer that's willing to take new risks. Like Riot has always been really good about how fan art has been treated and how they've allowed kind of extensions of the expression of their world. some publishers and developers aren't so liberal with that kind of extension. And that's the thing, is that what we're doing doesn't work if we aren't able to kind of have a more open-minded view of extending that community in a fun and new way. So some of it comes down to, honestly, is like, is this a great esport with a great community? Yes. Are they willing to lean in and be innovative with us and try new things? Yes. Then I think, I mean, that's not all of it, but those are the kind of the main strokes.
So you talk about, like, obviously one of your big sponsors, or your partners, excuse me, is NBA. How did you go about getting and securing? That's a huge partner to have. Just in general, basketball is gigantic, in the U.S. How did you go about that partnership, and how are you planning to tackle other things in the future, like getting involved with the NFL, which, like you mentioned, you didn't say by name, but you mentioned that they tight gripped over their IP and over their players and their logos and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, the NBA has been great. I mean, so it helps with, my two other co-founders being owners in the Golden State Warriors. And so that, as an owner, they know the pain that, that the sport is trying to kind of do with connecting to a younger audience. The awesome part about the NBA is not only is it massive, and not only is it in the perfect sweet spot and also overlapping with League of Legends fandom, but they are very innovative, even in obviously what they've done in other areas like Top Shot and so forth. So there wasn't an initial sell. Like, they're already sold on being innovative. The trick is as we were determining what we were doing, what was realized is that there isn't anything exactly like what we're doing. Therefore, it's hard to write a contract for that. So a lot of it, honestly, was, how do you define this legally? How does this make sure it's not like cannibalizing their fantasy stuff and cannibalizing their sports betting stuff with MGM and all of these different things? And so by having them kind of on the journey with us to define what we're doing, it helped write the legal contract that then allowed us to then go and sign La Liga and sign, trying to think of what we haven't announced yet.
Other opportunities, other partnership opportunities.
It's like, but yeah, there's a number of other ones that we've signed that, that they're all very similar, because, to be honest, they all kind of have to be. We can't have one league king making us, right? Whether it's an esport or a traditional sport, because the economics have to work. And we've got all these leagues to agree to one currency, which is pretty unprecedented. And at the same time, your fandom isn't siloed. You could have 100 Thieves cap on with a Lakers jersey and run into a La Liga area, which is very unique to anything that the leagues have come together to do to celebrate fans in a very kind of like overlappy way.
So speaking, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but obviously you have some very experienced partners in this venture with, like, the co-founder of YouTube and stuff like that. What are some of the problems, like, going in a little bit deeper, to get people to use your platform? Again, getting people off that YouTube or Twitter or Instagram, it's got to be challenging to say, look, we offer all these interesting features, but getting them out of that ecosystem and putting them in a new one, you get a lot of resistance, I would guess, from a lot of consumers. Yeah,
well, I mean, so there's a couple different aspects to how we are. Again, we believe that we're not a solution looking for a problem. When you look at all the data, like there's some really great Y Pulse reports on Gen Z fandom, and their number one request, the frustration, is lack of fan engagement. Now you would say, well, that's not true. Like, they have contests all the time. They're like trying to give them free shirts. Like, there's fan engagement, but the trick is that they're not giving it in the form that they want it, right? Like, they're trying to, obviously appeal to an endemic crowd. They don't want to alienate existing. So it can't be in something so exotic as, let's say, what we're doing. And so with that, it allows us to essentially go in and create, an environment that really kind of gives the fans, at first blush, right? So we've been testing some of our creative. The creative performs really well because I would say that we have the most creative license to color outside of the lines than any other licensee, right? Most kind of third parties coming in and licensing, a property or a game property or whatever, they have to stick super close to like, this is the brand guide. It's an image of so-and-so. There's a stripy background and put the logo in the right. Don't put it in the left. But we're creating all this cosplay, weird stuff that is just not your typical kind of fan area. So our testing of the creative has been very successful, even though we're not really in user acquisition mode. So it catches your attention, which is great, but we have to deliver on the promise. And so that's what we're working on, of course, is retention, engagement, all the other kind of fun factor components of it. So by being very different, we immediately kind of get their attention, but we have to make sure that we deliver on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, you said it exactly. We just said like your whole point of this company is to gamify the fan experience. What if the fandom was a game? Because I used to work in marketing too, and hashtags and paid posts only get you so far. I mean, banner ads are completely useless now. So like we're in this really interesting point with marketing, and just to get the word out there in general can be very difficult and very costly, and sometimes not yield the results you want. After you spend $300,000 having Joe Blow influencer stream your game or whatever for 30 minutes, and you're like, why did no one buy anything? We should have got at least 1%. You know what I mean? It's interesting. I think that's a generational thing about millennials and Gen Z, not so quickly to gravitate towards something right away. It takes time, like building a community like you're trying to do with GreenPark.
Yeah. And I don't know how familiar you are with sort of like ARGs, but it is very much like an alternate reality kind of game, because we are moving between, the real world events are powering a fictional world in a sense. And it's an interesting sort of mirrored reality kind of design. You get the benefit of sort of built-in episodic content, right? If you think about what drives the appointment-based aspects of it. Like normally if you make a game, you're like, crap, we got to get them to the game. We have to create enough content for them to keep them occupied, and they're going to consume it way faster than we're going to make it. But by writing on top of something where the content is, the storyline is kind of already being written, and there's already appointment mechanics driving it, and we just have to make it crazier and larger than life than they've ever seen it. It gives us that flywheel effect that isn't the traditional like, crap, like we built something that nobody cares about. How do we make them care about it, if that makes sense? We could screw it up, right? We could basically screw the authenticity of it and be like, oh man, they completely destroyed my, the culture of this team or what have you, tribe. And, that's where we have to be careful.
Is it difficult? I mean, you mentioned before with games like Riot and Dota, they're very open to having people, fan service coming up and doing that. But is it difficult to work with the more traditional sports leagues, like for your little like avatars and stuff? Like, say I really like football, and I'm like, oh, I really wish they had like a football jersey of, the Browns in there. But I feel like that's a whole nother can of worms your team has to constantly work with and talk with, and meetings upon meetings and negotiations with like NBA, NHL, NBL, MLB, stuff like that.
It's interesting. I mean, luckily, some of these ideas, I don't think I can't imagine, that we were the only one to have this idea, but I think the timing is a key part of it. There's a couple of dynamics that have occurred, right? Especially within a lot of leagues, they know they have to be innovative. And in many cases, there's been consolidation, there's been changing of the guard, there's been kind of different minds brought in that know that this has to be urgent, right? Entertainment and gaming have been collapsed, or media and gaming have been collapsed into the same group, as opposed to feeling like a tug of war. And what that's done is it's taken the approval processes that you could imagine if we were Fanatics and we're like, hey, we've got fanatics.com and we're selling shirts and hats and stuff, and we need this stuff approved. Like, they have these processes in place. So we're kind of drafting off of some of the analog processes that they already are used to, but we're doing it in a digital fashion, which makes it a little bit more ephemeral, right? For some reason, there's no like, well, if we approve this, it's going off to whatever country to be manufactured, and there's no takebacks. Like, if they have a thing where they're like, crap, we didn't catch that, and we're like, all right, no problem. We'll add the logo to the back of the thing. It's a little bit less precious. So that's why the partnership's so important, is they gotta want it, and we have to innovate the process as much as the product, if that makes sense.
And just because I'm generally curious, because we're in a really interesting time for digital currencies like Bitcoin and stuff, like where do you see that playing into GreenPark overall in the near future, next 5 years or so? Yeah.
I mean, from a currency standpoint, there's the different kind of fungible, non-fungible, kind of views of things, even when it gets into tokens, right? Like there are tokens that you could be earning for the length of you holding an NFT, right? Like let's say you had a signature hat, and for every day that you hold on to it, you get kind of a spirit token. I'm making this up, by the way, right now, but just to give an example. And the more spirit tokens you get, maybe the more influence you amass, right? So the more sort of allegiance that pertains to. And so it just allows us to have different quantifications of it. And some of it is inside, right, our economy, but some of it, as you can imagine, being able to have that hat and put it on a secondary market or put it on OpenSea and be able to, flip it for someone that wants it more than you. That's where the fungibility of the non-fungible side of where the currency piece of it comes in. NFT is the focus, but there's definitely an interplay with actual token kind of mechanics within that as well.
I can also see your platform like lending itself very well. I mean, it's not that we haven't seen this kind of idea before, but an imaginary currency, not no real money, but betting points for something to happen, or for teams going to be up by 7 points or make the field goal, whatever. But it usually involves a proprietary plugin in a browser or a proprietary plugin on a mobile browser. And then again, you're not really getting like anything from it, right? You get made up points, but you actually keep track of these points, and you get avatar rewards, and you have an account to show you how many points you have to flex. It's that thing that a lot of the younger generation likes to see in that stuff. They don't want to get that. Sometimes that instant gratification is cool, but if it doesn't lead anywhere, it's kind of whatever. But it goes back to the original idea of having, I won this hat, or I won this ring on my finger, or whatever, whatever the cosmetic is, to show that you're really good at calling stuff out in the esports or sports or whatever.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Sorry, was there a question?
Oh yeah, so sorry. So yeah, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting way. Like I think that to have it all in one place and not just be segmented in a single single game with a proprietary browser. It makes sense to have it all in one app.
Yeah, and in that it's kind of like your universal fan ID, I guess, in a sense, right? It's something to where it's portable, to where when you're at someplace, to your point, kind of fish where the fish are. If I'm on Discord and I am someplace and I want to flex on someone I'm talking to and be like, or you do this all the time, even in business. You're like, let me go check out this person's LinkedIn profile while we're talking kind of thing. The same sort of behavior in our mind can be mirrored in this way. Same way someone will go check someone's Instagram, and just kind of see like, they're talking about all these vacations they go on. Let me go to see if, if that's true. So yeah, it is kind of trying to get to that single source of truth where the value of what you're amassing and the proof of it really reflects your fandom in a way that can be fun, as opposed to just quantitative. Most sport apps that have been gamified are spreadsheets. I mean, it's a fun game. We play, big fantasy fan here, lots of sports betting, but at the end of the day, the app is essentially utility that facilitates the game. It's not really a dopamine-filled Mario Party-esque kind of, extravaganza, which is more what we're going for, the emotional side of things.
You touched on this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate a bit more. Is it harder to work with traditional sport dealers like the NFL or the MLB, as opposed to working with esport dealers like Riot Games or Capcom or stuff like that?
No. I mean, I think there's advantages that come with where they are in maturation, right? Like traditional leagues have been around for a long time, and a lot of the economic value is in their IP. And the video and the highlights, and it's very much a business around ensuring the integrity of that value gets maintained. Esports are trying to grow their base, and they want to put more stuff out there, right? I mean, even within GreenPark, we stream all of the League of Legends LCS games, right? Like, and it's doable, right? As a startup, doing that as a startup for any traditional league to that same degree would not be affordable. So it's just interesting where they are. I think it's not any problems. It's just they have different goals. But for us, in trying to curate kind of the world's fans in one space, it's interesting because we can see what's working and what's not. And even some of the leagues that wouldn't traditionally be as maybe liberal with highlights or viewing rights are looking at like, oh, well, I see what Riot is doing with GreenPark, maybe we should consider this more like social media, because we're willing to put social media content out with clips and stuff. Maybe we need to look at this differently, which is helpful for us. There's a little bit of a FOMO in a sense in that regards.
Yeah, I feel like especially this last decade, just for me personally, I've seen sports industries, not to name specific ones, just really struggle with how Twitch works and how they can stop their stuff from being content, and how if they should let it be streamed, or how that works, if they should charge, what they should charge, that kind of like that. You mentioned the highlights. They've been really struggling with that, and I feel like that's when esports has a major advantage, because they've already figured it out. But the traditional sports are still attempting to figure it out. And I guess the best way to say it would be where it's still profitable for them, but not a loss. I guess that would make sense.
Yeah, it just depends on how you're measuring the value of it, and what's interesting about the age demographic that we're circling around is it is a clear and present common pain point, right? Younger demographic, and they just they want to be in front of them as much as possible, and because they aren't going to the traditional places where you would be able to influence them. And so by having them in this area, and you think about like even just the adjacency of being in a world where if you are a league that is really trying to grow its younger fan base, but you can be adjacent to one that is of a younger generation, and you can offer kind of like, hey, if you for every league you get to pick out some starter gear, and there's an event this weekend, and if you participate in it, you'll get something that you can only get in this league's area. And so the questing, even that can kind of create over-the-top quests, helps us drive and grow their fan base, which is very valuable, and the data behind it too.
Yeah, I mean, I could even see something similar, like maybe like a young man is on your app and he really likes League of Legends, and he sees some other guy wearing a cool Chicago Bulls hat, but he doesn't know who the Chicago Bulls are. And then all of a sudden he's striking up a conversation about this person and what the Chicago Bulls are, and he discovers basketball that way. It's like you just said, like it's really hard to get people after 18. This is how you can introduce someone to sports they may be not familiar with, either because they're not exposed to the United States or they're overseas in the EU or Australia or wherever they are.
Yeah, well, even with LCS, so we worked with each of the 10 LCS teams to almost create, because it's almost a branding exercise, right? Like if you saw like a legendary 100 Thieves fan in GreenPark, what does that look like? And is it on brand to their kind of whole kind of image? So working with each one of the 10 teams, we were able to get to that, which is awesome, because if it didn't represent them well, it would not fare well for us. But what's interesting is that new fans coming in, they very much, even in, I was watching a video the other day, this one guy, he admitted, he's like, I'm a huge Jets fan. You want to know why? Because when we were playing Madden, my friend picked one team, and I had to pick the Jets. I didn't know who the Jets were, but from that point on, I was a Jets fan. Like, and that's the way it went. And I've seen people even go to pick an LCS team to back, and they're like, ooh, I like that logo. I like the color. I like, it's just hyper casual, super casual fans. They're looking just for some kind of analogous metaphorical thing they can resonate with. So it's just interesting. It's not very scientific.
So my last question is for you is where can people download GreenPark? You guys doing a closed alpha, closed beta soon? Like where can people experience this metaverse on their phones for themselves?
Yeah, so we're in early access, our fancy way of obfuscating the alpha beta, debate. And we did have a gate up, but we've been testing new cohorts coming into it. So we're on the App Store right now on both Apple and Google Play. We haven't been promoting it, but it's definitely open to download and try out. We're going to be doing more actual overt marketing later this year with some other announcements. But right now it's kind of an open early access.
Do you want to talk about some of the mini games, Ken, that you can play in this verse?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess let me give you a quick framework of how we think about it, right? So if we were a traditional sports network, the way you typically plan is you're like, okay, we need before, during, and after. We need content that gets everyone, speculating and talking about what's going to happen. Then we have during the game, and then we have kind of the post kind of content. It's the same loop for us. The only difference is we're not trying to create linear content. We're trying to create interactive experiences that allow you to partake in that over that rinse repeat kind of fashion. So when it comes to what's going to happen, I mean, prediction is at the core of it, but we wanted to make it a lot more casual, almost kind of like a board game level accessibility, or, you know, obviously I'd say Mario Party a lot, but, you know, that kind of game show inclusivity of it. During a match, we have a number of things in the works, but you could, right now you can go into a watch party. For League of Legends, we're streaming the games. There's chat. We've built in Giphy, so you can kind of, we call them blurts. You can shout as Giphies. And right now it's just kind of like the beginnings of that sports bar communal kind of shenanigans area. So we've got a number of kind of micro games that we're going to be dropping in to win prizes during the event. And then we've created 2 mini games. One is essentially like a Fall Guys kind of homage, where it's an obstacle course. But what we've done is we've created gates that are trivia gates. So if you imagine physical obstacles and then mental obstacles and then physical obstacles, and what they are like a Japanese game show. I think it was Takashi's Castle. I think it was, where we essentially have a question like, well, who got first blood in the game yesterday between TSM and 100 Thieves? And on those doors, if you run through the right door, then you go through and you boost through. If you run through the wrong door, you get zapped. So what's interesting is that trivia really is past tense prediction in our eyes, right? Who's going to do it? Who did it? Who did it? And so that is kind of, again, another example where you can be running with other fans, the cathartic of like knocking, you know, a rival fan off of the edge of things. But then we've built in sort of the knowledge aspect of it. And then lastly, one of our earliest tests with Riot has been a dance battle game, which is essentially really kind of more of a grindable. If you need to get more points, you can play. It's a rhythm game that we started out with League of Legends music tracks, and we've duplicated it for NBA, and we've done some like up and coming producer kind of UGC tracks for the NBA version of it. But yeah, again, our goal is to create events and things to be able to do every day, right? That ritual of checking into GreenPark 3 times a day. Very similar to, I guess, when you think about something like a Zynga game with like a Mafia Wars, right? You're going and doing something, leaving, coming back, doing something, that kind of thing.